So I think I'll just start. Good afternoon and welcome to our October meetup, where Bryan will share his knowledge within moving UX upstream to strategy. I'm Tina Øveld and I will be your host today. And again, we can see this is a topic that you are quite fond of, so we are very happy that so many people will join us for this talk and also a bit longer discussion afterwards. And good day to you, Paul. Or we were discussing like it's almost good morning, right? You're in Atlanta.
That's right.
Yeah. So we were having a bit of a laugh with Paul's glasses, because I have introduced him every time I talk about this talk as Mr. UX Strategy. So I will also say today that Paul is Mr. UX Strategy, and he organizes design, strategy and innovation conferences in Asia, Europe, the US, and also online. And he leads design research and strategy projects and teaches UX strategy workshops for some of the world's best brands and industry-leading companies. And your goal is to help UX design, research, and product professionals take their careers to the next level in terms of effectiveness and enjoyment. So, and you're here today, so I'm very happy about that. So the agenda, as always, is that when I'm done with all the practicality, Paul will start his talk. And as I stated in the beginning, that we have a different format today. So instead of having this long talk, we'll have 20-25 minutes of talk where Paul will go through the different issues and the different topics. And then we'll have time for questions and discussions afterwards. As always, you can ask questions in the QA section here in Zoom, and just let them come in when they pop up. We'll take them when Paul is done with his talk, and then hopefully we'll have quite a good discussion around the different topics. As always, again, we are recording everything, and we will share a recording during the next week together with Paul's slides. So I think that's the practical side of things. And then, of course, I also want to present Preely. So Preely is a self-service platform for unmoderated remote user testing and also hosting of your own test panel or user panel. Feel free to reach out if you believe that we could be a great match, or if you're interested in hearing more, or maybe having a demo of the platform. So I think that was all from now. I'll give the word and the screen to you, Paul. You have around 20 to 25 minutes, so take it away.
All right, I'm going to take these off. A joke. And I'm going to also set a stopwatch. I'm setting it for 25 minutes because I'm going to zip through some slides. What I'd like to do is present the UX strategy framework that I've come up with and that I teach in workshops. And I'm going to zip through those slides very quickly. And then Tina's going to open it up for questions and we'll take it from there. So let me share my screen. And go to the presentation. All right. I'm assuming that you can see my screen. If not, Tina, please text me. But I'm assuming that
we can, no problem.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to talk about the UX strategy framework. And again, I'm going to go through these slides quickly so that we can have a conversation after that. The origins of the framework. I was born in New Orleans. It's a fun place. And so celebrating and enjoying events is just part of my nature. My first job was as a pharmaceutical, as a patent information specialist, unfortunate acronym, but it was a good job. It taught me a lot about information and the structure of information. That's what I have my master's degree in. I didn't like corporate life that much, so I decided to move to Barcelona and write about this profession. It's a very complicated thing to look for patents in those days. And so I decided to start writing books about it, and I moved to Barcelona. Unfortunately, my editor got fired. So I had to go from the beach in Barcelona to the library. I started studying the WWW, which was quite new then, in the library. Thank you, Anna, the librarian, for letting me do that. And I started working for a company called Sapient, a consulting company. They did a very great practice back then, one of the leading companies in strategic website design. They sent me a bunch of places like Rio de Janeiro, which was quite fun. And then I started, after Sapient, a couple of years of that, I started consulting with companies. And as I did that, I started to notice, especially with some of the companies that I had been part of their teams, there was a big difference between execution and strategy. And companies and design groups in different parts of the world, I just noticed that they were not created equal, and that some were much more, I would say, adept at bringing in a strategic element into design. So I started a group on LinkedIn called the UX Strategy Group. And in that group, some people said they wanted to have an event. So I started the UX STRAT conference from that group. And this year, we're in Amsterdam in June. We're in Boulder, Colorado, just a couple of weeks ago. And then we're going to Singapore, hence my background. I'm very excited about going to Singapore for our first in-person UX STRAT Asia conference. We have been doing it online the past couple of years, but got my shots and I'm going, and gonna have a good time in Singapore. And then out of that, I started a community of people who are interested in strategic design and trying to build the careers of people, trying to help people get to the next level in their strategic design practice. And that could be business people, could be designers, could be researchers, etc. And created a workshop. And in that workshop, I put together a framework based on these other various experiences, like I said, with the different projects I was working on, the conferences, the speakers, also just studying kind of 8 hours a day. What I typically do is look for strategy that's happening anywhere in the world. And so I put together a workshop. We were fortunate to be hosted at some well-known companies to present this to their teams and to some other folks visiting, and then lots of cities. And I'm very excited, even though the pandemic caused us to pause, starting to get calls again. Got one from Juan over in Madrid, and looking forward to getting back into the workshop frame of mind. But one of the premises of the workshop is that it's not normal for a company to hand over design strategy to somebody, even if they're smart or they're a great designer or they have lots of experience. I find that no matter where I am in the world, that people have to win the right to do strategic work. And that's why I call it going upstream, because when UX or design or research come at the end of a product cycle, then the influence that you can have on the direction of that product is very limited. And so that's why I say moving upstream is key to strategy, so that you can, once you're in the evaluative stage, the train has left the station. It is what it's going to be, and you can maybe sprinkle some UX pixie dust on it, but it's not going to be something that's going to be very successful in terms of the way that people use tools to do what they want to do. So to win that right, the first step, I think, is to develop a strategic point of view, develop a strong point of view, gather evidence for your point of view, data, quantitative, qualitative, machine learning, whatever that data might be. But another even more important step is internally to build influence, because just having great ideas and great strategies that don't see the light of day is not, that's not very important, not very successful. And so building influence happens to be a number of our talks at UX STRAT are around that topic. How do you gather the evidence, but then how do you build the influence to see that your strategy gets to the light of day? As I mentioned, the pandemic, this is a typical workshop. I think this was Google in Seattle, and everybody's breathing and coughing on each other, so it's been, the workshop's been quiet for a couple of years, but I'm very excited it's coming back now. Let me back up to what is strategy. Seems to be a mystery, but I would say it's a game plan, an approach, a recipe for success, a formula, a plan of attack that's going to guide the use of resources to take you from the current state to a future desired state. And it came from a military term, strategy, and then it quickly moved into business as business evolved globally. Michael Porter is one of my heroes. He says strategy is the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. There are a bunch of design frameworks out there. I'm going to present what I consider to be the UX strategy framework that I teach in the workshop. But there are many good frameworks out there. One that's been very popular for a long time is the double diamond. It's got lots of iterations now with agile and cycles and all kinds of stuff, but it basically started out something like this. First, you work on the strategy aspect, then you work on the execution aspect. I think it's fine to have a career in execution if that's what you enjoy doing. If you like making things and making screens and trying different stuff, I think execution is a great career. UX is a great career for that. If you like strategy, I think that there's going to be some steps that you have to take to, again, win that right to do strategic work. And that's what this framework is about. How do you do that? Another common framework is design thinking. These are 5 steps in the design thinking framework. And these are quite similar to the UX strategy framework with a couple of very important differences that I'll go over. So this is really well known. One challenge is to figure out which flavor of design thinking that you would like to get into. And people say it's ambiguous. I don't think it's so ambiguous. I just think that there's lots of options, lots of ways to do it. Another common framework is the design sprint. And I've done lots of these. I think they're an important way to do things. They usually happen in a week's time frame. And when it was created, Jake Knapp was one of the people that first publicized it. And if you watch some of the videos back then, it's all about startups. And of course, big companies would like to think, no, we're like a startup. We're real. No, you're not. You have a lot of history. You know a lot about your customers, and those things are very important. So having understanding as one day in a cycle for a framework can be very useful if you have a lot of ideas, like a Google or somebody like that, or like a startup app or something like that. I think it's very helpful to quickly get to the point, try different things, experiment with people. But if you're a bank or another company that has lots of customer data, I think that's kind of ignoring most of what you know about the people who are using your products. Another framework that came up about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, is the product management framework. A lot of the strategy work is done like this. Basically, you have a backlog, and then you have sprints, and the only key is where does that list of features come from that you start with, and that's one of the keys of the UX strategy framework, is how do you get to a set of things that should be considered in the first place. So let me get into the framework itself, and just as a time watch, looks like I'm at about 10 minutes, so about halfway through. And I'm going to, again, zip through this part of it as well. These are all just slides from the UX strategy workshop that I teach. I think the most important takeaway today is Bryan's law. The UX strategy framework is the way I would approach any project. And I do a lot of financial services, a lot of e-commerce strategy projects, and I will use the framework in every single case, but I don't use the same amount of resources and time and steps for every project. And I have to decide what is worth the time and the effort. And so when you begin to embark on a strategic design career, everything that you have to work on is not created equal, and they don't have the same requirements. And each one takes an exercise like this. R is proportional to R prime and R double prime. So what does that mean? The rigor, the resources, the time, the people, everything that's going to go into this strategy should be proportional to the reward and the risk that product or that service encompasses. Early in the banking days, PFM, personal finance managers, for example, had an enormous reward potential, but instead the banks that deployed these PFMs wanted to advertise loans. They wanted to, just sell some different products, and that's not what their customers wanted from them. And so if they had taken the time to figure out what their customers wanted and develop a strategy around banking that could be mobile and not paper-based, they would have won an incredible bounty at the beginning, incredible risk, incredible reward. They spent a lot of money on these PFMs, and I had some inside information to a number of banks, and they were hovered around 0% usage. And that's because they weren't designed with the strategy in mind. They weren't designed the way people wanted them to be designed, even though the reward was very high. And since then, lots of really famous product companies had some spectacular failures because they did their typical product management approach to creating the product, did not understand their customers, did not understand the experience, and instead, even though the reward was super high, failed, and they're gone now. So that's the most important thing I hope you take away from today. So I came up with a framework that's first of all scalable, and by Bryan's law, I want to scale it to every single project or product. It's aligned with business strategy, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. It's based on a deep understanding of customers, their needs, and their behaviors and experiences. It doesn't just focus on the product itself, but rather the holistic use of that product inside of an experience. And then there's structured ideation, prioritization, and then optimization at the end. So those are the pieces of it. If I wanted to represent it like the other diagrams, I would do something like this. The big difference here is going to be around the align and the understand, that those are like white bread. They kind of expand or contract depending on the value of the product itself and the value of the design effort that's going to go into that product. The ideation, prioritization, optimization, testing, all those things are going to be quite similar regardless of the product that we're working on. But the align and the understand have to expand or contract. So first, alignment to the business. Design is becoming a business success story over the past number of years. Are designers prepared for that? I mean, I've visited lots of designers in different countries, and often they are concerned with visual things. They're on their cubicle walls are photos or typography or etc. Do you even want to get involved in strategy? If you're an executive at a company and it's just part of everyday life that you're going to be pitching strategies, coming up with numbers, resources, etc. But moving the UX field into strategy, you have to decide if that's what you're interested in. And the experience strategy doesn't live in a vacuum. It lives underneath a business and a brand strategy. And that would take a lot more time to explain that, but it's not in a vacuum. It has to serve a larger purpose. So one of the first steps I do in the workshop is we start analyzing business documentation, whether it's annual reports, corporate strategy documents, annual operating plan, market data, et cetera. We want to understand what is this experience? How does it make money? What are the levers that are going to say, are you successful? Are you not successful? And I think if we don't have an understanding of the business itself, it's hard to do any kind of strategic work. And going back to Michael Porter, he said that it's about having a different position and a different set of behaviors or different patterns. And the position is who we are as a product, Preely as a product. Who are we? What are we trying to do? Is the second aspect to it. So first of all, the position in the marketplace, who we are, and then the pattern, what we do. The experience strategy should be based on the business strategy. Here's a business model canvas for Uber, for example. And this is a step one. If I'm designing anything, I want to understand what the business is behind it and how do they make money and what are the drivers and what are the channels they operate in, how do they get the revenues and costs, etc. I want to develop an understanding of that. That's some homework that I have to do if I want to impact the strategy. So if I looked at Uber in more detail, the experiences, I want to go from one place to another. The position is at the beginning was what if people could get a ride from other people and not taxis and pay less than they typically pay, and also kind of have a lot more certainty around the experience. So that was the position, and it worked extremely well. The next step I want to do besides understanding the business is I want to establish some design key performance indicators that map back to the business key performance indicators. And it sounds complicated, but it's really straightforward. If I talk to any executive at a large company, there are certain KPIs that they get rewarded for, and those are clearly spelled out in annual reports, et cetera. Well, I need to tie design to that because when we succeed, the business has to succeed. So I need to understand what that means specifically. So some common business KPIs, sales, order size, gross profit, average margin, et cetera. And then on the design side, there are some quantitative and some qualitative KPIs that are very common. The fact is that best practices are universal. They apply everywhere that people use websites or apps. But strategy is very specific. I did strategy work for 2 retailers that are almost identical in what they offer, but are very, very different in their strategies, because strategy is contextual. It's also why in Europe and Asia, when we do the UX STRAT conference, we don't have the same talks and the same speakers, because the strategy is quite different in those places. So alignment is one step I think is really missing from the other frameworks, and I think it's an important first step. The second part is the depth of understanding that I need to gain. Again, if we're trying to put out something that has a win, a potential reward of, 1,000, 100,000 euros or dollars or whatever, that has a certain amount of resources I want to put into that strategy. But if it's in the millions or bazillions, then I want to really understand the experience in depth, and I want to tune it to the right level for what the potential risk or reward is going to be. And I see life as a series of experiences, not as how old I am, but rather, experiences like this one today. So this is a product, as an example. This is an experience using that product. They're not the same. And the product contributed to this experience, but it is not the experience. This is a tomato. This is an experience. It's not the product. It's something much bigger. It just uses the product. This is a product. This is an experience. And so on and on. I think that product is a very narrow focus, and that the experience is something that we have to understand in more depth. There's a product I have a whole bunch of. This is what it really looks like. It's not that work of art that you saw in the first picture. It's this, and I have this set up right here on my desk. One of the ways to understand an experience is to create a map, an experience map. It generally has stages on the x-axis, and then it has some parameters of analysis along the y-axis. And those parameters vary a lot, and we cover a number of those parameters in the workshop. So after I understand the experience, I want to understand the people involved, and that generally requires segmentation of some kind. And this is an example of a segmentation. It looks like a persona, maybe an archetype, but there's some parameters in here that are being analyzed, and that's the key to a segmentation, is which parameters are you going to use? And then the personas come as clusters of data from those parameters. If you've chosen the wrong parameters, your segmentation is off. So finding the right segmentation parameters is key to creating a strategy and to creating a set of segments that you really want to prioritize in a certain way. And they should have data going into them, they should have data going out of them, and then create some kind of a cycle that your archetypes or your personas get smarter over time with data. You can take a lighter approach, and if the risk or reward are very low, then I think a team brainstorming some personas is great. It's fine. It helps everybody kind of understand the target audience if the reward and the risk are low. Then we move to the ideation phase. Brainstorming, I love it. We did a 3-hour brainstorming session yesterday, but really structured ideation is much more valuable in terms of companies moving forward. And structured ideation, there's lots of methods that you can use for this. In the workshop, we covered 3 or 4 in depth. But structured ideation, then we go into a prioritization exercise, and then we go into a testing and optimization part of the exercise. And these are the steps I'm going to go through no matter what context I find myself in. And I'm going to do the best job I can, given the resources and given what the value of the problem to solve is. And typically I want to find something that's going to work for both the business itself and the people using it. And then optimization is then back to that kind of agile testing, execution, machine learning, just making the product better. There are lots of methodologies for the prioritization and optimization that are out there. So I do want to thank Yahweh. I forgot to do that in Boulder, who got me into this business in the first place. And I want to thank you. So Tina, I am turning it back over to you. And
you were fast, but great. So it was so interesting because I participated in a talk by Don Norman some time ago, where he said that he actually believed that every designer needed an MBA in order to actually survive in corporate life. And I'm sitting a bit with the same feeling, right? That tapping into these KPIs in general like we definitely need to do it, but it's so difficult. So I think like the first question is that, okay, do you have experience in which KPIs that is best to tap into? Like if you're completely newbie, you've not done this before, you are eager and you're brave enough to look at the business strategy, and then you have the list over all the KPIs that they like want you to perform on. Which one should you tap into as the first step before you take the whole bunch?
Well, I think you already covered the first step, and that is taking a step. I think the limitation is that people don't try, and that it seems too daunting to start looking at that. So in the workshop, what we do is I hand out an annual report and then say, find these 3 things in there. And then they start reading through it and they start looking at the priorities, and then the teams pull out the KPIs out of the document itself. And so, for example, in our exercises, they're in a hotel. And so a hotel has a very specific business model. And if I look at a specific hotel, which we do in the workshop, then they have certain things they're trying to hit. Like next year, we want a certain percentage of our bookings to come through our properties and not through the OEM properties. We want to have a certain satisfaction rating where the guests are saying this is going to be, a 4.5 or whatever that we're trying to get to. It's not that the designers or researchers are going to then be business people and get their MBAs. It's not really about that. It's just that if you don't know where the ship is heading, how are you going to get it there? How are you going to create stuff that's going to get it there? So I think just spending a night reading through, if you have a new project, if you do a bunch of different companies, or if you're at one company for a long time, is just to get familiar and just to start reading and start picking out those things that seem like this is really important to them. How am I going to get them there?
Yeah. So actually be a bit brave and then actually take the annual report and actually start like digging a bit into it and then see where that can lead.
Exactly.
So I think this is a bit more to, because you talked about this, like different processes that we normally tap into in order to be creative and in order to develop products and so on. So in your experience, are there any existing ceremonies, artifacts and so on that can help lever the UX strategy in general? Can we tap in somewhere? So instead of we going out and want to say, okay, here we are, we want to do something now, and then start creating new ceremonies, creating new ways of working and so on. Are there anywhere where we can just say, okay, we take this and this and this because it already exists, and then we of course enter into that process that is already established?
Yeah, I do think so. Like I said, there was a big movement, again, 10, 15 years ago, I'm not sure, into product management processes and agile and kind of 2-week cycles. And I noticed something interesting about 5 years ago. Some of the largest, most advanced companies in the world, the Googles, the LinkedIn's, et cetera, they started taking people out of those teams and putting them into what they call the research or insights group. And then they gave them the time and the resources to begin doing this more strategic work. And I would say they moved from evaluative work into generative work, where they're trying to create something new in a marketplace. To do that, I think the field of anthropology offers us lots of clues. And I've done, when a client doesn't pay for an exercise like that, because it is expensive, I'll do it on my own. I'll go in the store, I'll go in a place and observe, and I'll just start doing that anthropological observation and mapping and things like that on my own, because I think that's where I start building understanding, like what is happening here, and then how do I start saying, well, this is where I want that experience to go, and then start creating a product from that. So I think I draw a lot of inferences and methodologies out of anthropology.
Yeah. So what about like in the company? Because like my experience is that you also need a lifter there, right? So one thing is that you have the opportunity of going out and make like some exploitative work in the beginning, maybe before you also go into development. But then when you start going into development, where you still need to have some sort of user experience going, you need user research, user involvement in general. Like, do you have any experience in like, okay, how to do that? So when we're at that point in development.
I think that's a really hard point. I guess that's why I put the word upstream in our, as you and I started talking, I feel like upstream is the key, because Like I said, when you come at the end and there's already a prototype, there's already a bunch of features, there's already something there, it's going to be hard to have the influence to say you need to be doing something quite different. So the methodologies at that stage, I think, are really well understood. I think for the last 20 years, those methodologies have been quite understood. I think throwing in some machine learning and experimentation platforms at a quantitative level, of course, makes that much easier and more reliable at the evaluative stage. So it's not just I'm talking to somebody and they're telling me their story and then I'm making some decisions about how to improve the usability of the product. I think that's very valuable. If I have hundreds, thousands, millions of people and I'm getting the data and accumulating that in a certain way, I can shape the product very well, but I can't create the product at that point. So I think strategy lives upstream from that, where you can still impact the direction of the product itself.
It makes sense. So who should be part in creating the strategy, the UX strategy?
That's a great point, because I keep debating with my stakeholders that we need to not say UX and say strat, but they keep disagreeing with me because the field is growing so rapidly still and still expanding, and they feel like it's just part of the identity. But we started inviting data scientists, we started inviting product managers, we started inviting other roles that I think have to all be at the table to do design strategy. And it's not just design, it's not just research. There are a number of people, and we're trying to bring those people into the UX STRAT conference, because even if I have these ideas and I have these methodologies and practices, if it doesn't get wired back into the people that have to make these decisions and make it happen, it's of limited value.
Yeah. Yeah, because I also think that's like what we struggle with a lot, because we also have a question coming in here that how to handle the crash between UX and business. So like when you launch a product on time versus launch a good product. And that's definitely something like, I think every time I've been out talking with people, like I think they have brought this question up in different, like they've just worded it differently, right? Because they are so used to, when they are sitting in especially the big organization, in my experience, that okay, the KPI is that like something has been pushed out, not it actually perform as it should in the market.
Sure. Let's take Zoom as an example. You and I and everybody here, we're using Zoom right now.
Yeah.
That's a product that was figured out quite a while ago. So to make it better in the sense of having a better meeting right now or better tools, I think those short cycles of improvements and understanding behaviors and taking analytics out of this and machine learning, I think those are all valuable ways to make Zoom a better meeting tool. If Zoom, however, wants to create a different kind of product where they're more embedded in business, more like a Microsoft would do, then that's going to take a lot of new work, and they don't understand that, and they don't understand what people have to do every day. So that takes some study, it takes some understanding, and there may not be a model for that to find a new way to work with. We have people in place and we have people remotely. That's going to take some figuring out, and that's when the strategy becomes more of an important thing than just optimization. Optimization of the current tool is kind of easily well understood. Creating a new Zoom that invades your life more, your work life, I think that would take a lot of generative research.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I hear it so often, this issue, right? And then the UXers or the designers in general are standing on the line. Also, if it's just a redesign, for instance, right? That they're just like, we're not ready, it doesn't perform as it should when it comes to the experience part of it. But then like, it's so important just for internal numbers that it goes out. And I've been in organizations where it has been exactly the same, right? And it's just so frustrating that you're standing there being like, I know this is going out. Maybe the reviews are going to be so bad. We are losing customers. We are losing like brand identity on it because it's so bad. But because like numbers is key and numbers is what like decision makers very often understand, then it can be this crash that we're standing in. And sometimes like we end out by saying that, okay, then I can't be part of this organization anymore because it's so bad. And it's just so stupid. If we actually look at the strategy in the long run, it's like, you know, you have this like you have this time frame here where, okay, internally we can say check, 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 check to these KPIs, but like in a year's time or 2 years time, from a more like overall strategical point of view, as a brand or as an organization, we're just losing numbers, right? And it just feels to be so stupid. And I think we have also been discussing it a bit like prior to going online, right? Saying that, okay, it seems like there's some sort of middle management problem here, because very often we see that the UX are very keen, of course, to deliver the best possible product. And very often, like the C-level are also quite interesting and also actually starting to push initiatives forward that brings users closer to product development in general. And then we have those people in between that is just like fucking things up, right? And I don't know, like, if you have any experience with this, or if you have any like thoughts about this, because it seems to be such a frustration. And both, like, as I said before, I've tried it on my own, but also like, I think every time I have a discussion about strategy, like this comes up some way or the other.
Well, I mean, I think you used the right words there, that there's this frustration.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think that having an insight isn't sufficient. So here's my insight, here's the direction I think, here's why I think that. That's not sufficient.
No, but I hope that you have, you know, the golden stone here that, okay, I've seen this work in an organization, right?
Well, I think we have to, yeah, we have to build our evidence that that insight is actually something. And that means we have to get into some more quantitative aspects of it. It can be anecdotal in a qualitative sense, and those were often where insights come from. And I highly value qualitative research because of those insights. But if I'm the researcher, I'm the designer, I'm the product person, and I have some insights, but nobody's listening to me, I share some of that responsibility because I have not done a good job of communicating my view of the world and why I think this is important. So I have to do some homework on my own to create communications that will allow my product manager, will allow my data scientist, will allow my business partner to understand why I think this. And I think that's where some of the strategy framework has to come into play, is how do you do that in a structured way so that people can understand the basis of your insights and then move forward. Again, I think we get stuck also kind of not name calling, but I know when product management sort of took over this strategy function a long time ago, I felt like they were my enemies, the product managers, the person that just doesn't understand. They're just like project managers, they're, you know, resource managers, etc. They don't get human psychology, they don't get interactivity, they don't understand where this thing needs to go. That was a problem. And I didn't communicate well with those people at that time. It's just kind of us and them.
Yeah.
That's got to evolve, and that's got to change to where our communication becomes more convincing and compelling.
Yeah, but I think you're right. And also, as you point out, right, start talking much more into the overall business strategy as well, because I think for my part, I have not been good enough to do that, because I have been having that idea that, of course, this is like common knowledge, right? Of course we should do this, because of course that will like entail this and this and this, but sometimes you need to bring it down a notch, right? And just like take them by the hand and then walk them through why this is actually a good idea. And I see that as an issue for a lot of UXers in general.
Agreed.
Because how do you see like UX strategy tapping into UX maturity? Because I think this is such an important area and very interesting area as well. And I think like you can't say one without the other in a way.
Agreed. I think that, as you mentioned, like early on in the days of product design, that we had practices back then that worked quite well. And we were able to do usability testing and things like that. I think now it's a little bit more complicated to have that kind of impact. And I think there's the maturity aspect. I mentioned some companies like in the West Coast of the US that just have put a lot of resources into this problem, and therefore their practices are mature and their strategy is mature as well. So what I try to do with the UX STRAT conference and with the workshop is shine a light on people that are doing that really well. Context is really important. So the European context, the Asian context, the US context, and even the industry context within those different places, they're going to be very different. And so I have to build an understanding in my context what that looks like. But that is a maturity question as well, because I have grown to be able to create that argument, right? And so that's another stage of maturity.
Yeah. So I can see we have a comment from Philip here. I think he's a bit frustrated. So he says that there's so many models and ways of doing UX perfectly, but yet lean UX is about bringing random non-UX roles into UX and doing UX. So they have a lot of frustration around the others that don't do it right, wrong testing, false assumptions, biases, and so on. So his question is, but yet it brings a set on a pedestal. Oh, I think this is that. But yet it seems to like lean UX is the way we want to go, even though it seems you don't need a long education to do lean UX. So do you believe lean UX is the way to go? And Philip, if I misunderstand your question, please write a new one. But lean UX, I think I have experienced the same. It seems like because a lot of people know about lean, and then lean UX has also just had a lot of what do you say, have a lot of fame as well. And I can also see that I teach UX at the university right now, and when I bring in different frameworks, very often they just, oh, lean UX, that's like, okay, so you just take the normal like lean enterprise and then you just add some sort of testing with the prototype and then you're good to go. So I definitely understand Philip's frustrations here. What do you have anything there that's saying that, okay, can we do anything in order to actually say that, yes, of course you need a great education in order to do this. You can't just bring in random people to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to Bryan's law. I think lean is appropriate when the reward and the risk are low. And I could see why lean is very attractive to organizations. It makes sense. It's the opposite of fat and lazy, lean and sleek and quick and quick to market, beating competitors. What's not to love about that if you're somebody that's not really down in the weeds of design and research and all that kind of stuff? Then that just sounds good to me. Hurry up, get some stuff done, and let's beat the competitors out of the marketplace. That sounds great. Where it breaks down is when the problems can't be divided up like that, and where the problem can't be addressed in a couple of weeks with making the button green or blue or big or small or left or right. Those kind of incremental changes and incremental decisions are not going to save a company that's trying to break new ground. It's just not going to achieve the results that they want to achieve. And that's why I mentioned several large companies with digital companies. They realized that and realized that their product management cycles with lean produced things that were just incrementally better, and their competitors were jumping ahead into new areas. Like, we talked about banks before we started this, but I think financial services, that's one of the last strategy projects I worked on in financial services was, first of all, imagine there are no banks. Okay, you can't do that in a lean way. There's no lean way to think of a different way to interact with your finances. That's an example. So I think lean is helpful when the problem can be chunked like that. It's very efficient. It just sounds great. But when you're trying to do something different, it just doesn't work.
I actually have a question that is a bit in line with this, because in the organizations I have worked with prior to Preely, like I had a lot of issues with marketing, because they had the idea that they were the ones that were the voice of the user, they were the voice of the customer, they knew better. And then very often we saw in my UX team that, okay, we were sitting there trying, a bit like Philip points out here, that we actually wanted to do the right way. We just, as like we actually had an education, we had a background in doing it correctly. And then we saw marketing coming in, just being like, oh, we have spoken to like X amount of customers, we can see this and this and this. And then when we walked through the reports from this, like everything was just like, we can't draw conclusions on this, right? But it seems because they were fast and they like had a voice in the organization and could put huge numbers to some of the stuff, even though it was like interpreted very wrong. They just had a mandate to just run away with everything, or run towards what they wanted to do, of course. So do you have a take on like how to, as a designer, actually how to like bring in marketing in your favor, because what I could see was that they had a lot of resources compared to the design, not the design department, because they also had a lot of money, but the more UX research area was just like so like broke, right? So actually tap into the budgets around the organization, in this case like marketing, of course, and then actually like have a alliance with them in a way.
Yeah, I'll have to go back to kind of the early days of UX for that one, because in the early days, there was a fight between marketing and UX and who's going to decide the direction. This has a lot to do with the brand, and we own the brand. So therefore, we should be deciding all this website stuff or this app stuff. And then as UXers, what we were saying is your approaches to understanding our customers are demographic, and they are having to do with spend levels and competitors, but where the magic lies is in the behavior and understanding people, and understanding that two people in very different demographics can have a very similar behavior. We have to design to the behavior, not to the demographic. And so there was this fight back then. I think more recently, we need to build a shared understanding. So what I advise companies when I'm doing strategy work with them is they start putting their customer journeys and all those kind of deliverables that touch both marketing and design and research, start putting those in public places and start say, come in and give us your input, show us what your perspective is on that. Because I think a lot of times UXers are lacking the quantitative market aspect that marketing brings to the problem. It's not a question of ownership, it's collaboration. How does my model become better? Like a customer journey map, when we're working on it together, and I'm doing the behavioral psychological parts, you're doing the market parts and the demographic, how do we make something better together is my answer.
Yeah. So maybe that taps into the next question. So how to balance business needs with user needs in the UX vision and strategy?
Yeah, I mean, like that's like when you go to the big department store and the bathroom is like way back in the back where you have to walk past all the sale aisles, and often your stakeholders want you to put, no, I want this up front, I want that up front, I want these things to be where people are going to run into them. And that's just a misunderstanding of how our customers are trying to get stuff done, because the last thing they want is a long route to the bathroom if it's kind of an urgent situation. So I think the same thing in experience design, that it's not just doing for the business or just doing for the customer. Neither one of those is the right answer. It's really, how do we align first to the business so that our results are meaningful, but then how do we get into the behavior and into the experience itself and just create better experiences? And that's I can't only look at the business to be able to do that. I have to look at both the person and the business needs and align them together.
So maybe that taps into this one. So UX strategy bridges the gap between brand promise and actual customer and user experience. But how to get business on board?
Back when maps first started being created, like Magellan, they made a map that was the map. They went out there and they discovered and they brought stuff forward, and because they had a perspective on it that nobody else had, nobody else sailed around the earth, so they made the map. And I think that's our responsibility as well. I mentioned that nobody gives you the right to do. I haven't run into many companies that say, hey, go create a strategy for us on the design side and we'll just do whatever you say. I just don't see that happening. And so I think that it's up to us to create something that is compelling, that allows the business to see that this is our success because all of our customers are able to achieve their needs better.
Yeah, because in a way, I think we come a bit back to the whole MBA talk, right? In a way that like, do we actually need so much more? Like, should we actually say that the ones that educate UX designers and UX researchers should actually also include some more business courses into the different studies?
I definitely think so. I mean, the UX STRAT conference, when I explain it to speakers, I say it's a combination of business strategy and experience design, because I think they're at a large scale, those are highly related fields. We had a talk by Matthew Holloway back in 2014, so that's 8 years ago. He said, is this function going to be taken over by designers who learn business or business who learns design principles and research? and there was this question, who's gonna own this? And I still don't think it's resolved. So I think it's more the people that do their homework of the other side of that
Yeah.
argument, and then can phrase their insights and their strategies in a way that builds influence internally. I think that they're going to win, whether they're on the business side to begin with or the design side to begin with.
Yeah. So how do you see storytelling? You talked a bit about it in the beginning, right? But like, as I see it, storytelling is like also a key feature as a designer to actually have. And I'm for sure in lack of it, because I think that, okay, of course, this is just so simple. So just goddamn understand it, right? So that's for sure something that I want to look into. But I guess this is also something in general that is like, be able to both be a storyteller, but also be a storyteller via data, right? And then break everything down. So also when you're having for instance, a user test or a user research in general, that you can break it down to the great story in order to convey results, convey like why we should go in this direction and so on, and not just like only have results and not only have the argumentation for doing so.
Right, and be over in the corner mad that nobody's listening to you.
But that's that's
yeah.
normally that's my approach, right?
Right, no, and I think you're totally right, that storytelling is a key to that. And I know a number of our people that are talking on stage about this method and that method, they always get back to, but to build influence and get it done, I had to create a vision of this and also give data, but I had to kind of bring people along with me. And that is the storytelling aspect, as you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah.
But we can't, also, I don't think that any one of us, whether they're listening to us or you or I, it's not that we can do everything, right? We have a limited time, we can study some stuff, we can do some stuff. So I think understanding my makeup, what gives me joy. I went through the pandemic and I watched photos of conferences, my conference, for 8 hours a day at first. Just let me just see what's valuable here. Let me figure out what is really touching me and what do I want to work for and what do I want to get up every day and have joy from. That mattered to me more than like, what are the best conference people doing and what are the most successful, this or that. And I say the same thing to my kids. Don't try to be successful. Try to understand what you enjoy, what you're good at, and what somebody wants to pay you for. And I think storytelling can be a growth for anybody. Anybody can become a better storyteller, and taking classes and all that's worth it. But at the end of the day, there's a fixed amount of time, right? And you have to figure out what are you effective at and what brings you joy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it's so interesting. So I also have maybe, I'm not sure if it's a question, but I think maybe it taps a bit into this. So I have one of my friends is also a UX designer, and she always says to me that it's so frustrating being a UX designer because I'm always in conflict with someone. So do you believe that the UX strategy can actually help somewhat with that? Because we can actually, instead of being like the center in all of the discussion and like trying to cater for a lot of different professions, if we can actually lie it on the table and say, this is actually how we're going to do it, and we're going to do it because X, Y, Z, then we might be able to actually also, in a way, what you say right now, that actually take back some of our empowerment and then put it where we actually believe it's worth, instead of just surviving in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of a rough life to have to always be in conflict because your points of view are different from the points of view of your colleagues, et cetera. But I have a very strong prejudice that this is, at least at a very successful level, that this is not one role and it's not one perspective and it's not one person. It's really complicated to get something done at that level. And therefore, I want to invite people to create something with me rather than win the argument.
Yeah. So we have one here, what actions will bring the highest value? So I guess it's a bit like where to start and like where to focus the energy from when you start doing strategy work.
Exactly. And I think value is the key word there for me. And there are values to my customers that I'm trying to serve. They have a set of values, right? And the company I'm trying to serve by doing the design or research work, they have a set of values. So I think, and I showed the little diagram with the parameters of segmentation, having to pick the right ones before I get into what my logic and what my rationale is going to be for taking a certain direction. I think that, yeah, value is just the key word. And my values as an employee, my company's values as an entity, my customers' values, and then finding that intersection and then creating stuff around that intersection, I think is a win for everybody.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. So time is almost up. So I think just the last question is, do you have any best practices that we definitely need to know before we leave this meetup? Or anything we should be aware of?
I mean, again, if I was hired tomorrow to do something for Preely or something for a bank or a retailer or whatever, I would use the framework that I just mentioned. And I would first try to decide, what's the win? Is this an enormous win that we can do, or enormous risk that I have to mitigate? And then kind of size the effort. But once I size the effort, I am going to go through those things I just mentioned: alignment back to the business, understanding the experience, understanding the customer, ideation, prioritization, optimization. I'm going to go through all those steps. So if I guess if I leave people with anything, first of all, it's Bryan's law. I have to size the effort appropriately. But after that, I think the framework has worked really well. And I'm pulling it from a number of different people and different countries, et cetera. But I think that's, if I was, and I am going to be back on the road teaching that framework in the workshops. So that's what I believe in.
Yeah. Oh, I think that sounds great. But I think it's just such an interesting topic, like UX strategy in general and what it can be used for. So like, yeah, I think, yeah, I could be talking about this forever, right? But I can see time is almost up. So I'll just say so many thank you to you, Paul, for joining us. I think this has been, yeah, very interesting. And yeah, it's just, yeah, a great topic to discuss. So I'll just end or like leave this by saying that for you behind the screens, keep an eye on your inbox for a recording of the talk and also Paul's slides. And again, you are more than welcome to reach out to us here at Preely if you could be interested in some of the things that we provide around testing or remote unmoderated testing, but also hosting our user panels. So just let us know, and then we'll see if we can make some magic happen together. And also for the meetups, like, let us know if you have any ideas on topics or talk speakers you would like to hear, and then we'll see what we can do. Like Paul is actually here because some of you reached out and said that it would be nice to have him on board. So we're very pleased about that. So I think that was it from my chair. So thank you for now. Thank you for joining, and have a great evening and have a great day, Paul.
Thanks, Tina.
Talk to you later. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.